Should be good now. We're recording. All right. So I really just wanted to have a conversation with you guys about politics because I think we all have fairly interesting opinions. I think we're generally pretty well educated on politics, and I never really get to talk about this with anybody. So is it safe to say that the three of us agree that the system is very fucked up? And we all kind of lean different ways within that agreement. Like, Mike, you lean more towards Trump right now. Conor, you leaned more towards Bernie, and I lean more towards Yang.
I don't think that's an appropriate assessment at all. I don't think Mike leans towards Trump.
Thank you.
You don't think that Mike what?
Leans towards Trump?
No?
No, I think Mike's a right-leaning libertarian. He doesn't like the neocons.
But the options right now, wouldn't you say that you lean, well, not just, well, okay, maybe I should say that there are aspects of Trump, like maybe his policies towards China, that you've been more favorable towards?
Oh, yeah, I'd probably agree with that, but
okay.
But yeah, I would say some things, but that's like any, I mean, you could take pieces of Elizabeth Warren's platform that would probably be like, she's not totally wrong on that. I mean, very few, but like, I mean, I think there's always something that you could find some common ground with. And also, I don't think I necessarily, I mean, I always had this discussion with Conor. I feel like we always talk in circles around it, but I know like we usually have the same issues with the same problems. And I think that we talk about it differently, but Conor and I actually agree on what the issue is and how to fix it. It's just, he usually goes one direction with it. I go with the other. But I think it really, at the end of the day, is the same solution in a lot of cases. Conor, would you kind of agree with that? Right? Yeah. Like you're always like the corporations are the issue. I'm like, I agree, and I think that the government causes the large corporations to do that. And you're like, well, it's the money in the system. It's like this like circular logic that I'm like, no, we're agreeing, but it doesn't sound like we are.
It's really a chicken and egg sort of argument we usually get into.
Exactly. Yeah.
And maybe you're using different terms to describe sort of the same things.
Yeah, basically Mike's like, the reason that corporations are the problem is because the government allows them to be.
Yeah.
And I basically usually come in saying the reason the government allows them to be is because the government is owned by the corporations. And so it's like circular loop. Basically the problem is crony capitalism.
Yeah. And the reason that I'm right is because at the end of the day, if the government didn't have the overarching power to do a lot of what they could, there wouldn't be that power to be corrupt in the first place. So I win.
And that's where we disagree, because I point to pre-regulatory USA, sold my soul to the company store.
Oh yeah. Well, this is what I don't get. Like with the, I definitely share and sympathize with libertarian ideology as well, but it really doesn't seem like we ever, and I know that, the free market is like an ideal, but it really doesn't seem like we've ever actually, we call ourselves a capitalist country, but we really have never been in our lifetime. And like when our parents talk about...
A free market's a fever dream. It's not a real thing.
Well, like when our parents talk about kind of, I'm not necessarily saying our parents, but the boomer generation kind of talks about making it on their own and grit and all that. It's like, I don't think they really realize that, the New Deal was set in motion like just before they came into existence, and there were things like the GI Bill and favorable interest rates and tons of jobs that were available just after the war. And so, like,
how dare you suggest that I did not get where I am based solely on merit? How dare you?
Well, I mean, but that's where I'm coming from. Yeah, I know it's like that. That's kind of the attitude, but it really does seem like people don't realize that over the last century, the like everything that we've come to like about pretty much the U.S. superpower status or anything related to that is a direct result of government intervention in markets and social programs.
I think that before the last, I think since we're, guess in the last like 40, 50 years, I mean, in the 20s and the 50s, we saw like the largest expansion of wealth worldwide, pretty much. When people talk about the Gilded Age, there's a reason it was the Gilded Age, and obviously there was huge wealth disparity. It also lifted the poorest people into a higher position and advanced, technology, advanced labor. Then World War II happened, and it basically destroyed a lot of wealth.
That's a very Eurocentric opinion. That wealth boom in the 1950s lifted a lot of the poorest in the West out of poverty, and it often led to much, much worse living conditions for those that were being the reasons that the wealth generated, for all the sweatshops opening up in China that didn't exist before, all the people that were normally working and now have to work in insane conditions.
Yeah, but even that, when you talk about that in modern day, for instance, look at China, right? China is the almost stereotype of sweatshop labor, and now it's actually evolving. It's actually becoming more. People are moving out of China because it's actually getting too expensive for them, and they want to go to Bangladesh to make their horrible sneakers or whatever. But even that, people say
people are moving out. You mean businesses, or you mean Chinese citizens?
Businesses.
Oh, okay.
Because Vietnam is cheaper, for instance.
Yeah.
But even that, people say, "Oh my God, it's so horrible that someone's living on $1 a day." But at the same time, it's that dollar might be more than what they were getting before. And yes, if you're coming from a subsistence farming, and you're we were just kind of had our property, we grew our tomatoes, and we live like that. Yes, in that context, it's probably worse off. But if you're living from abject, horrible poverty and not sustaining in the modern world, it's everyone has that period where they start off with very cheap labor, doing all the work that other countries don't do, and then they kind of move up the chain. Ideally, I'm not saying that happens every time, but I think that's usually kind of the progression you see. Think about 50 years ago, people would laugh about Chinese labor. Now China is the second wealthiest country in the world and the fastest growing.
I guess that I would say.
Honestly, that was an easy prediction to make if you knew anything about the world. A lot of many big economists made that prediction.
What prediction?
That China was going to rapidly overtake everyone else.
Yeah. So I guess that I would say that it does seem like there is a class of wage slaves, basically, who when people say all right, well, if you don't like your job, then go someplace else. If you don't like what you're getting paid, or take the other option. I think that sort of industrialization in the modern economy has effectively made people so that they no longer have subsistence skills. So they know they don't have another option. So they have to partake in a job with a wage, and they're sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place, it seems. And
I kind of agree with that. I would kind of agree with that too. Even seeing, to an extent, because even now during this whole COVID thing, it's really funny. Obviously I keep chickens,
yeah,
and I'm in a couple of Facebook pages that relate to chicken, poultry, whatever. And it's funny. Some people I want, with the shortage of eggs in the grocery store, I decided it was a good time for me to get chickens. But then I got a letter from the town that now I have to appear in court. Some lady literally posted 2 days ago, I have to go to court because I got a citation for keeping chickens. And it's in a lot of places, people are so used to being separated from the dirtier aspects of life and self-sustaining self-sustaining skills that it's been made illegal to be allowed to keep your own chickens, to keep any kind of livestock. Back in the day, people kept fucking hogs in their basement. Obviously that's probably not ideal either, but I think there's some a lot of interference in where you could garden. Oh well, we can't garden here because that's the neighborhood park now or something. There's just a lot of stuff where people have basically kneecapped from being able to do things for themselves.
That's true. Yeah, the regulatory. This is something that people don't realize is just like I was talking about before with the state of the world over the last let's say 80 years post World War II is really an anomaly, and I think people don't realize that. And everything that is part of the regulatory state, the security state, and the welfare state really got added on to the American government in the last 80 years. So I agree that and Conor and I have talked about this before. You probably talked about it with Conor too, but you get regulatory capture basically, where, you know, regulations that start with good intentions get captured by industry and by companies that take part in setting those regulations.
Oh yeah, and that's exactly what you're seeing now with, like, you know, like a lot of times you'll see, you know, big corporations want all these crazy, you know, limits and inspections and voluntary testing on certain. And I mean, it's not all bad. Sometimes it's like, obviously it makes sense to, like, you know, test baby milk or something.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they go so crazy, and then only the big corporations who could afford to hire, you know, super expensive labs, super expensive lawyers are the ones who can actually comply with these rules. So basically knock all the smaller guys out of the club.
Yeah, it does. And I know that Bernie Sanders has been saying this forever, but you know, like, it just sort of blended into the background. But it really, I don't know if you agree with this, Mike, but I definitely do see what he's saying, where we're not really a democracy, we're an oligarchy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of part of exactly what we've been saying in terms of, you know, having like this like wealthy class of people who all went to the same schools, their kids all, you know, inherited, you know, $1 gajillion, and, you know, they kind of stomp on like upstarts basically, or they kind of bring them into their circle. I mean, like, there's always be so inbred that they prevent, you know, new blood from coming in.
Can you say that the last like 15 seconds again? You were cutting.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying, like, you know, having like a super inbred system where only certain people are like kind of you know, like, look at our higher education system basically. Yeah. It's like, okay, obviously you have to be very smart and talented to go to like Harvard, but I don't think that necessarily every person who's smart and talented went to Harvard. Gotcha. But because they went there, they automatically kind of get a pass to do things that and have access to things that maybe they shouldn't, and maybe, you know, at some point maybe the what do you call it? Maybe people need to reevaluate the individuals coming out of it. You know, like, when every single person in a school graduates with honors, it's like, I don't know, is that legit? I feel like there'd be a bell curve no matter where you go.
Yeah, that's a good point. It does seem like there's an intense focus on pedigree and credentials and basically grooming people, which is really disturbing.
Yeah,
it's the new version of royalty.
Yeah. Well, actually, one of the American versions of royalty is celebrity. I was thinking about that recently, where it's like, you know, we don't have a royal family like the Brits, but we do have the Kardashians. We do have the Kennedys or whatever, you know.
Yeah, but I still think of I mean, in terms of the public eye, yes, like, people want to maybe emulate, like, you know, being a Kardashian or something. But in terms of like who holds the levers of power, like, think about how many generations of like Bush or Kennedy or Clinton. What the fuck?
I know the Kardashians aren't controlling the levers of power. I'm just saying that, you know, it's our culture.
Yeah, but I'm saying, like, the levers of power are controlled by, you know, it's a very inbred group that seems to always be the politicians. They always seem to be the, you know, tippy top of different corporations. Or if you look at, like, you know, which politician's family is on the board of like 500 companies, you're like, oh, that's interesting. It's weird that this one family holds so much talent that they deserve to be like on top of everything, while some other guy is just you know, went to school, got good grades, and is like, you know, pushing them up or something.
Hey, we live in a merit-based society, okay?
Don't you think it's frustrating how people hold on to these extremely simple narratives, like, you know, Fox News versus MSNBC, Democrat versus Republican, liberal versus conservative, when in reality, it's shifted to being people who are anti-establishment populists against a corporatist, neoliberal, and neoconservative establishment, which is also an oligarchy, basically.
I mean, if you think about it, it's almost like pseudo-class, like the beginnings of a pseudo-class warfare.
Yeah, I guess you could, yeah, that makes sense.
But also, I mean, think about the things that people get worked up about the most.
Yeah.
Like, it's pretty weird in my brain that, like, it's basically the same, like, 4 or 5 issues that pretty much suck all the air out of a room.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of those things where at the end of the day, I'm a big believer that, like, the Democrats and Republicans, the only real difference between them is like 3 or 4 points on tax rates.
Yeah.
Like otherwise, they kind of end up voting for the same stuff.
Basically, right?
I will say that there is one.
That's what I'm saying. Like they're always like.
There's one really big difference between Democrats and Republicans that I think like doesn't get said enough.
Yeah.
And that's that at least you do get elected Democrats that don't toe the party line. And that just doesn't happen with Republicans. Republicans
Really? I'm pretty sure the president didn't toe the party line. He got made to the highest office. Trump was like the least wanted thing by the Republican Party.
And then he got elected, they all towed the line. Except maybe.
I mean, but you could say the same thing about. Can't you say the same thing about Biden right now leading the party or Hillary Clinton last time around?
No, because there's a bunch of elected representatives shitting on him, and they probably won't stand behind him.
Hold up, Connor. You're saying that once Trump became president, he towed the party line, like he became.
No. The party became.
No. That all the supporters did. Yeah. So I kind of agree with that, but at the same time, I mean, look at how last in 2016, and again, I am not a registered Republican. I don't really support Republican or Democrat, so I feel like people just always assume because once you start talking, you always get lumped in with like, oh, you're conservative or you're more libertarian, so you must be Republican. So snip that in the bud. But what do you call it? What was I saying? Oh, in 2016, it was like the Democratic Party did all these moves that kind of like shifted Sanders out of the spotlight and Hillary Clinton into it.
Yeah. So
I think like while they're good at putting on a show about being like, oh, look at these progressives and stuff, at the end of the day, they all end up kind of voting for the budget. They all support the same budget. They also they put on a good show, but when it comes to like Patriot Act stuff, when they renewed that like a few weeks ago or whatever it was, a couple months ago, when they all had to vote for the budget, when they all had to sign the defense bill. They're still, they just signed in the largest budget ever known to man. That was before COVID, which, has blown through it even quicker.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they have this, but I don't know if that really ends up in different results.
So basically, do you think that the establishment right now, Democrat and Republican, is the antithesis of what libertarian is, and that they're basically neoliberal, neoconservative? They're addicted to deficit spending, running up huge debt.
I'd say the defining feature of neoliberalism and neoconservatism is doing whatever they can to give kickbacks to the wealthy.
Yeah, like being basically corporatist, no matter how you cut it, right?
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I would say that it's less about deficit spending. They do that, but the reason they deficit spend is because they spend all their money pumping up other people's pockets.
Okay. So that's just like a feature rather than the defining aspect, like how, being authoritarian is part of being fascist, not the defining, something like that.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Oh yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious if most people can even really realize what is going on here. Whether
most people can't tie their shoes.
Yeah, I know, but it's like, is this basically so? Most people, and I'm not just sure if this is our parents' generation, but a lot of them, they still watch traditional news outlets, and that's just like such a smoke screen, basically. And
that's exactly what I was kind of saying before, though. It presents stuff in a way that's like, very like, red team versus blue team. And that's how the news really supports that system, aggressively, where they say, oh, this senator eviscerates this other senator. And it's like I don't know. Then you actually read the story, you're like, I don't know. It seems like they had like a pretty spirited debate, and I don't think they get along, but I'm sure they a lot of times you're like they probably have lunch together. That's like the feeling I always get. I'm like, I think these guys. To me, politics has just become professional wrestling.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that, because I was just thinking that, like, as you were talking about that, I was like these people go at each other in the wrestling ring, and then afterwards they go, oh, good job, man, good job. Great hit.
And that's going down. What do you think you're talking about?
Yeah.
That's what I was saying before, though. Think about it.
To an extent, though, that's like just.
When you look at the Democratic Party, right? Of what? Sorry, I didn't catch you there.
It's just an extension of profit-driven media, though. Like, on one hand, yeah, there's this like selection of people that you hire that are going to toe the overall line, like the theme, the narrative that you want. But realistically, all of that, like such and such slam so and so, is just profit over all else.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but an example that of just showing, like, just talking, but then acting differently. When you look at like I said, the last couple of years of Donald Trump's presidency, the Democrats accused him of being an asset of the Russian government, like an actual employee of Putin, basically, and like saying the leader of the free world is now basically just a spy for a country the size of New Jersey. And they're saying like he's literally Hitler, literally a rapist, whatever. But then it's like, oh, also we're going to give him the most power that any president has ever had in all of human history.
Yeah, that's definitely
like the most military money, the largest budget. Like, it's like if this guy is literally Hitler, which I hate that term, but I'm just saying it's obviously used a lot.
Yeah.
Then why are you giving him more ability to start wars and increase the size of his government forces?
Well, it's the cry wolf that goes into smearing your opponents with the worst possible. When it was the 60s, the 50s and 60s, calling everybody that was remotely left of center a communist, and now calling everybody who is remotely right of center a fascist or a Nazi. There's such an unfortunate cry wolf aspect to that, where it's just so overused that nobody pays attention anymore. And yeah, it's a good question of if he's really seen this way, then why is he still given all these resources? But also, this just popped into my head. So Biden has this lady accusing him of rape, right? Or some form of sexual assault. Aren't the Democrats, I haven't really been watching the news too much, but aren't the Democrats going to have to backpedal pretty intensely, considering what they did with Brett Kavanaugh? And they said, like, you have to listen to all accusations and trust
They already have.
Yeah, so so right now there's an intense backpedaling going on?
Yeah, that believe all women shit went right.
There's backpedaling by literally everybody right now, because you have all the people who are super up in arms about Kavanaugh now saying, oh, but we have to do all these investigations into the Biden thing.
Yeah.
It really puts a spotlight on the fact that these people never really cared about women in the first place.
Yeah.
And it was all just
politics.
Convenient.
Yeah, they don't care about the victims. They care about using them as tools.
Yeah, because like all of the things that people bring up about the Tara Reid case, about why it's shady and probably not realistic and blah, 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 they're the same exact things that you could have said about the Kavanaugh case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really, I'm curious if the people who were really involved, like Alyssa Milano comes to mind, do they realize the irony, or do they really, like, their mind has this dissonance that cannot link the two of them and see them as similar?
Usually it's the latter. I actually know quite a few like super left-leaning people who were all gung-ho in Biden. And as soon as it came out, they were like, hold on a minute, that's fucked up, we should look into that. So they didn't have, but these are like regular people, obviously, and not media personalities.
Connor, how do you feel about Biden?
I have spoken very unfavorably about Biden since he joined the race.
Say that again.
Do you guys think he's actually...
Say that again, Connor. There was some crinkling.
Connor said he's spoken very unfavorably about him.
Okay.
Like from the instant he joined the race.
Got it. And what are the main reasons for that?
He's just a classic neoliberal. He's no different than Obama.
Okay.
He's probably even worse than Obama. He's just going to talk a big game, and then he's just going to give handouts to big corporations.
So would you say that some of the biggest criticisms against the Obama administration were the bailouts of the banks and the auto industries, and then also the drone program.
Starting 5 wars wasn't great either.
5 wars.
Yeah.
So let's see. It was
5.
Libya, Syria, right?
Yemen.
What else?
I think the support in Ukraine was one of them.
Oh,
I forget.
Yep.
Then there was there was a lot of action around like the Horn of Africa, Somalia,
Okay.
and
Gotcha.
I mean, when they 5, yeah.
I know that the foreign policy and this is one of the big issues with neoliberal, neoconservative, any type of foreign policy post-Soviet Union collapse is like the defining villain of our foreign policy has been gone. So, and I talked about this recently in a podcast episode, is like, it immediately, like the crisis mode of American foreign policy went from Nazis in Japan immediately to the Soviets, and then immediately to terrorism. And terrorism is sort of like an end-all, be-all, because it's so effusive and difficult to pin down that you can just like infinitely say terrorism, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Now, declaring the war on terror was like the biggest like scary moment, because you can't just like point to a place. It's like we could go anywhere, anytime, for any reason. As long as it's cloaked in, they're a terrorist, and they've used it to like really batter people over the head and do a lot of illegal shit.
I mean, it actually really only works if the people are brown, like.
The claim of
terrorism.
That's
true, yes.
Yeah, because there is a lot of like subtle racism in the U.S. The terrorism thing only works on brown people because people think that terrorists look a certain way.
Well, this is one of the things that I actually liked about Yang, is he was saying that he wanted to have like white supremacy added onto the legitimate list of terrorist activities.
Yeah, but if you guys think about it, one thing I remember is that it's like in the 90s especially, the government already has been at war over that subject.
On the patio.
Yeah, what was going on the government side? Because I know that we've talked about Ruby Ridge and Waco and Oklahoma City, but what was going on the government side?
I mean, the militia movement picked up again during the Obama years, but you forget that it was really big in the 90s, and then the FBI basically systematically shut down every single group that kind of carried that banner. So it's not like they, and they did, a lot of people were killed during those things. A lot of people were killed in, various raids. A lot of people killed in the drug war. On all types of color. It's one of those things where it's like, yeah, it doesn't get as much airtime, but it doesn't mean it's not happening.
Okay. So I don't know the true history of what the U.S. government has done aside from those major instances in the 90s in relation to domestic terrorism.
What's really funny about the war on terrorism is it's been a great diversion of resources for the FBI, because basically since the war on terror started, the entire financial crimes division has been shut down.
So you said that it's been detrimental to the FBI, or it's allowed them to focus on one single thing?
No, it has basically removed their ability to fight financial crime.
Oh yeah, so because all the resources have shifted.
Yeah, exactly. So the FBI are basically the main people that go on. I mean, the SEC exists, but that's just for securities fraud and things like that. But all types of financial fraud, the FBI used to be a huge resource in that, and their financial fraud or financial crime has basically been hamstrung.
So we're talking about like major scams and maybe Herbalife and
exactly. Yeah, that is definitely a thing. The SEC is actually looking.
Okay, so multi-level marketing, pyramid, Ponzi, all that kind of stuff. Interesting. Yeah, there has definitely been.
Also just like fraud.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also just like large scale fraud.
Okay. Yeah, it's really unfortunate.
Like Enron type stuff, which I mean,
I'm definitely down on the criminal justice system, and I know that's not new for a lot of people. A lot of people have been for a long time, but there's a Netflix documentary. Did you see it about the drug scandals at the mass crime labs?
Oh no, you mentioned it to me. I didn't get a chance to watch it though. I got really sucked into Billions recently.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, basically, it's 4 episodes. It's a docu-series, and there were two. Massachusetts has 2 crime labs. One of them is over near Forest Hills, and the other one is at UMass Amherst. And the one at Forest Hills, the lady there, her name was actually Annie Dukin, and she was like, I think, a Harvard graduate. She was a very smart young woman, and she was doing what was called dry labbing, where effectively she was looking at the drugs that were sent to the lab and just comparing them to other drugs and not actually chemically testing them. So she would take like 15 drugs that look similar to each other and then test one of them and be like, and just expedite it. Her case is that way. Her caseload, she get like 4 times as much done than the other lab techs. So there was this huge scandal where all of the cases that had her signature on it were compromised. Everybody that was in jail because of drugs that she had tested or not tested was a question. And then over in Amherst, there was a woman named Sonia Farak who actually started becoming addicted to the drugs in the lab. She there was a brick of cocaine that came through. She like saved some for herself. She was testing under the influence of drugs, and she even at one point cooked crack at work on one of the little hot plates. So what's her name? Not
So you're saying that both crime labs were compromised?
Both crime labs. And Martha Coakley, the attorney general, basically came out and was like, oh yeah, like everything's under control. This doesn't affect anything in the, people in jail or anything like that. And the people in the documentary are like, she didn't know that. She couldn't say that. She this had huge effects. And so they just tried to like tamp it down and cover it up. A huge scandal.
Did she get in trouble for that, for lying to the
Actually, I don't think there were any punishments for her. And right now she's a lobbyist for Juul cigarettes.
Fucking, of course she's a lobbyist.
Yeah.
But like that just amazed me that I get. I mean, actually, I don't even know if I get it, but like the idea of like having protections for public servants, but then the idea that they could just kind of do whatever they want and almost face no consequences just blows me away.
It's fucked up. I mean, it's the same thing.
Consequences only exist for the poor.
Yeah. Well, there was do you know who Robert Reich is, Connor?
Connor, I would argue hold on, time out. I would argue it's for anyone between poor and not super rich. Because I mean, like, if any of the 3 of us did something, we're probably going to jail. Like, I don't know about you guys. I don't have like a gajillion-dollar lawyer on retainer.
Well,
the concept that it's only people.
Can you afford a non-public defender? Because already you're way better off than everyone else.
Well, it's the public defender thing, Connor, but it's also the network. Like the wealthier you are, or the more access that you have, the bigger the network you have, and the more people you can call on to get you out of shit, get you out of jams. So like people like we would be more screwed than anybody. Like look at the moms in Hollywood that tried to get their kids into college. Like if any of us tried to do that shit, we'd be way more fucked over than them. If anyone who lived in
we wouldn't even know how to get to the point of doing that though.
I know there's truth to that as well. You have to have the connections to even begin the crime to begin with at that level, but it's really it seems a lot more based on how connected you are.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely pretty. Oh, okay. I was talking about there's this guy Robert Reich. Have you heard about him, Connor?
Yeah, he's the former financial advisor to the Clinton administration.
Yeah. And then I think he served under Obama too.
I don't know if he did. He might have.
Okay. I thought he was a secretary of something, but basically.
He might have been a star or something.
Yeah, he wrote a book called The System, which was actually, I thought it was pretty good. It was, and he was talking about throughout the book, Jamie Dimon, the CEO of what's it, Merrill
JP
Lynch?
Morgan.
JP Morgan. JP Morgan.
No, JP Morgan.
Yeah, JP Morgan. Yep. But I definitely I see what you're talking about with the with consequences and how crime is basically
And ice is the freezer, obviously.
you just don't have any defense the poorer you are.
Were you going to go into the Jamie Dimon part at all?
Oh well, I mean, so he was saying that Jamie Dimon and a lot of people in Jamie Dimon's position come out with the whole like, you know, corporate accountability thing, and they talk a big game, and then they just like they're just it's just all a public relations campaign basically.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, I don't remember all the details of, but Jamie Dimon, I think, read the book and was like, "Hey, fuck you." So, you know, I don't really know how. Like, where would you begin to attack the criminal justice system?
Make
make
a police officer require a college degree instead of 3 months of training. Not actually a college degree, but like a similar level of rigor.
Yeah.
Not 3 to 6 months of training.
I mean, I would also think just getting rid of a lot of the laws that they use to jam people up would help a lot. So I think obviously overhauling the drug laws in general and just taking away an excuse for someone to be like, I suspect that, you know, you could do XYZ, so now I have a right to do this. Like basically just enforcing, search and seizure and stuff, and not letting no-knock warrants for misdemeanor crimes happen, so that they could like blow down your house and shoot your dog and then get the address wrong and not even, not have to be accountable for it at all. It's just like a lot of stuff that just allows.
The police should not investigate the police also.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's pretty screwed up.
Yeah.
There needs to be an independent third party. So
for both investigations and
like a truly independent third party.
The DA should not handle those cases because his job relies on working with cops.
Yeah, that's true. There's definitely a huge conflict of interest. And so, Mike, what you were saying before, if I have it correct, is like a lot of the laws that to the average citizen, they don't even really know that they're on the books. And like they try to claim things like, oh, well, ignorance isn't an excuse. It's like, yeah, but these things are never enforced. And they're only there as an excuse to effectively trip people up and get them if they're being a nuisance or if the cops want like have their eye on somebody, right?
Yeah, it's authoritarianism.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of love. Like if you look at because there were criminals at one point that were like, I mean, there still are obviously, but who were able to like outsmart the cops because the cops are in theory supposed to play within a certain set of rules, meaning the Bill of Rights, and then they come up with something like the RICO Act, where it's like, if you were like, you're basically guilty for all of his murders, and then they use that to like just leverage people and turn people, and it just becomes a way for them to like when we watched the Ruby Ridge documentary together, they were trying to use the RICO Act to basically jam up this dude for selling sawed-off shotguns and then tie him to this like huge criminal enterprise. They were trying to use him against them, but in reality it's like, oh, there's not really a connection there. You guys are just basically ruining people's lives in order to sell, get good PR and get a bigger budget next year.
Yeah, so they're basically entrapping people, right?
Yeah, but it's not even like they're entrapping someone for a good reason. They're just like, legitimately entrapping someone.
Yeah. And
a lot of it has to do with cops are dumb.
And that
a lot of it. Well, yeah, I mean, like it does seem like, and I don't know if this has.
They don't want smart cops because smart cops leave because they get bored.
Yeah, well, that's the case with a lot of jobs, not just cops, but cops. It's particularly problematic because they have weapons and force behind them, the force of government. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. And they did drop their standards, just like Mike and I. We've talked about how they dropped their standards to let more women in. Physical standards. They also dropped mental standards back in the 80s because it was going to be too it was going to potentially limit too many minorities from becoming police officers. So I think there used to be like more rigorous mental exams.
It also costs more money.
It does cost more money, but
That's one of the biggest reasons they can't get good cops because they don't want to pay cops a good wage, so they get shit cops.
Well, isn't it also
They
connected?
undertrain them.
Isn't it also
There's money.
connected to the military-industrial complex, where like we have all this equipment that can no longer be used to the military, so they give it to the police departments, and then the police departments have to take huge budgets and pay for training on that equipment and maintenance of that equipment, and that money could be used for,
No, that I think that factors back into the stupid thing because the cops want those things. They like the new toys.
No, I know they like the toys, but it's like the money.
Yeah, and not
Go ahead.
and not just that, Pat, but not only are they getting all this stuff, they don't actually spend their budget on it. The federal government basically gives it to them. That was kind of like after 9/11. That was like a lot of these local places got all this like high, what do you call it? Like high speed equipment. But not just that, but it's led to a lot of things in terms of they're not really getting additional training for it. They just get it in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
B, and I've listened to a lot of podcasts on this. I've spoken to people who are in the military and stuff, and they say like, when you go to put on like body armor and your sidearm and you have your rifle and everything, like you kind of go into a different mindset.
Yeah.
And you basically take like what should be like kind of community peace officers, and you're trying to turn them into military operators within their own country, and it becomes very us versus them. That's where all that thin blue line bullshit comes from. And all of a sudden you have these people who are, everybody's an enemy. Everyone needs to be slammed to the ground, have their arm broken, take them out of the car. Oh, whoops, I accidentally shot him 15 times. It's like, oh, but, I feel the fear for my life. I mean, there was actually a case, I don't know if you guys heard about that Duncan Lamp case in Maryland, but it happened kind of right before this whole COVID thing. But this dude was, I think he was charged with illegally owning a gun, or that he had a sealed record. The details are still foggy, and the police still haven't released an official report for some reason. But basically they went in, they had this criminal complaint for 3 months that they sat on. Then one day they decided to go in with a no-knock warrant, full gear. They threw a flashbang into his bedroom where he was sleeping with his pregnant girlfriend. And according to the family and the girlfriend, they shot him before he even got out of bed. On their side of the story, he was reaching for a gun. But even then, this dude's naked in his bed, and a bunch of dudes who are in full body armor, quote unquote, feared for their lives and shot the guy a bunch of times. And then they didn't even go get an ambulance. They just kind of let his own floor. And it's like stuff like that where you're like, really, what are you getting at? What citizens did you protect through these actions? Because it seems like you just, ran in and murdered a dude.
Yeah, it does seem like they basically play war games, and then they it's almost like in American Sniper when Chris Kyle, he would like dehumanize the Iraqis and see them as just like less than scum so that they were easier to shoot. It seems like that cops have, like you're just talking about, the war mentality. But I mean, do you think the number, not only are cops in police departments covering up for these major errors where cops are like trigger happy, and by the way, my uncle brings up often how after the marathon bombings, the cops just unloaded into that boat in Watertown. But not only are they covering up stuff like that, but what do you think the actual criminal arrest rate would be if like, it seems like the emphasis to me is you satisfy the public simply by having somebody that you can put the crime on. And like, I'm not saying that there's always an effort to just choose someone randomly. I'm just saying like, okay, once you have somebody, you don't ask too many questions. You just kind of get somebody in jail. And like, I think if there was a level of certainty as to who actually did a lot of the crimes, it would be way, way like bleakly a lot fewer that the cops actually knew who did what. You know what I mean? Like,
could you kind of clarify that one a bit for me?
Sure. So like, cops effectively trying to, they maybe don't have the okay, so you know how we were talking before about some of the tactics that they use, and like with Randy Weaver, for example, with Ruby Ridge, and how they try to entrap lower level people and then get them to flip and get higher level people, and they do kind of shady shit like that. And then if you point out the issue in that, they go, well, that's just how we operate. That's what we do. And it's like, yeah, but maybe you shouldn't be operating like that. And I feel like there are a lot of shady tactics that cops use simply to like, maybe they don't really know. Say it's like a drug crime, something like
but
that.
just to get a win.
Just to get
Yeah,
somebody
just
in jail.
just to get the win and say like
so
we
that
got
they
a guy.
so that they
Oh,
can
you hear
show
about
to the
that all the
public,
time with like.
yeah, we got the guy.
You hear about that all the time, especially when it comes to like the way they interrogate people.
Yes.
It's like, they'll keep someone sleep deprived in a room for 30 hours until the person's like, yeah, man, I shot the guy.
Yeah.
And even though there's like no physical evidence or anything, but then because the police and the AGs usually are so cozy together, they don't really like, stop to bother to actually get evidence or anything. They just want to stuff a guy in jail.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of people who have rotted away in jail because, they basically got done dirty by the system. And because, under the guise of like, we're getting the bad guys, but in reality, it's like, I'd rather see a guilty guy go, several guilty people go free than have an innocent guy rot in prison. And I feel like in our country, in a combination of, basically unjust laws and shady policing and shady, quite frankly, prosecutors and judges, you see this like vast amount of people who are in places they shouldn't be or have had their lives turned upside down. And even if, when you go through the criminal justice system, even if you're found not guilty, it doesn't say he's innocent. It says you're not guilty. So, someone comes out and they spent a ton of money on defense. They're basically broke. They have a huge stigma on them now, and that's how they have to go through the rest of their life. And it's all because, like, someone didn't do good investigative work.
Yeah, it's it does make me think of, and I think that you having friends who are veterans have probably heard this before, how the true war experience, how you've tried to get me to watch, and I do plan to watch it, Generation Kill on,
oh, yeah.
So I have heard
it kind of blows me away that you haven't watched it, but
okay, I will watch it.
It's a 6-part miniseries that's been on for...
I know. So I have heard that was an extremely accurate depiction of war, in the sense that what war is long periods of boredom punctuated by moments of sheer terror, basically, and like adrenaline. And so I think that's like ultimately what being a cop would be like too. But most cops don't want to deal with like the mundane aspects of justice. So they lean towards playing cops and robbers and like busting people's heads in and interrogating them intensely and shit like that. And because like that's what feeds the machismo, but it's not actually, it's just like how the CIA, instead of actually gathering intelligence, they emphasize covert operations that just fuck shit up, like
bombing a wedding.
yeah, exactly. So it does seem like, and maybe it does go to what Conor was saying, how there's like, a low mental threshold that we accept for our, our police officers.
And I mean, I don't like to peg necessarily all people in the police as, less intelligent. I do think it's more. I think it's more of a I think it's less that and more of a cultural issue and more of a training issue. Because you hear that a lot. Like a lot of times, these shootings that are very avoidable, happen because somebody tactically doesn't know what they're doing. So instead of like getting behind cover and ordering someone to get down, they're like standing out in the open, exposed, and they're like, "Well, of course I was scared." It's like, yeah, of course you were scared. You weren't behind like the concrete wall right there. You were just completely exposed. So a guy moved, you were about to get shot, or or the lack of like physical training. So that instead of being able to restrain someone with maybe like a like a jujitsu hold or something like that, they just like bash their head in or shoot them in the face, and all of a sudden or you hear about like the smaller, weaker cops who get overpowered very easily. So because of that, they always go right to their gun rather than like the regular, what should be the escalation of force of like, you know, restraint, then baton, then maybe like taser or pepper spray. It's like, no, just shoot him in the face.
Yeah, well, I don't necessarily mean to paint it as like you were describing before, where it's like, you know, an intelligence thing purely.
I do.
I think it does feed into it, but I think it's also, Connor, like that you get a lot of people who have personality issues and who have chips on their shoulder and who basically graduate high school and who don't have many options. And just like we talked about how a lot of those people sell their bodies to the military, a lot of those people have resentment and they say, well, I'm going to become a cop and I'm going to take my like rage out on society, basically. And I think that is more of a guy thing to do than a woman thing to do, in the sense of like, men tend to, when they're like angry, depressed, full of rage, take it outward on people and, you know, power trips and shit like that. So I think we're dealing with a lot of that too.
I think that's probably not inaccurate.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of, you know, I think you get a lot of like, you know, former jocks, former like football players who they were doing well in high school, and it was like their formative years. They maybe peaked early, and then they don't have options, and then they say fuck, and they become a townie.
I have yet to peak.
Yeah. So I think
and I mean, I think we should probably we'll get off this subject. We'll get off the subject in a second, but I think another thing to that I really dislike, and this goes back to the culture I was discussing.
Yeah.
Was this idea of like that, like, you know, another police officer could do no wrong. It's like, you can't judge that guy until you've walked in his shoes and all that shit. It's like, oh, he shot an unarmed guy 30 times. I feel like that's kind of society's job to judge.
Yeah.
And this whole idea of you know, like, I stand with my thin blue line brothers and all that horse shit. It's like, hey man, like, you know, I work in accounting. If there's some accountant in Texas who murders his family, I'm not going to be like, he was a good guy. You know, you don't know what it's like to be an accountant. You were under a lot of pressure. You don't know what it's like, you know, like, it's like this whole idea, like, even, I think one of the most famous recent cases was a drunk cop or whatever she was, went into the wrong apartment and shot a guy who was just sitting on his couch.
Yeah.
Because he got up and was like, why are you in my apartment? And then, like, you know, there's a long time between when the crime got reported and then when the police actually issued the report. And it's like, wait, why aren't all those people who tried to, like, cover up for this also going to prison or losing their jobs? Mm-hmm. Because there's, like, a pretty good, like, you know, they always come up with a story, and it's always like, oh, well, you know, but like, no, this person just walked into a house and murdered someone. Like, that's,
yeah,
that's
hate administrative leave.
And
that's
like, they start to.
What did you say?
Yeah, luckily I think that woman
paid
actually
administrative leave. That's the best I can do. Or they resign and go to the neighboring police department. That's all I can do.
Well, I think this one was so outrageous that this one actually.
Isn't it what the Catholic Church does?
They just ship people around.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a famous case in the Catholic Church where there was some dude who was diddling kids, and they didn't want to deal with the fallout, so they moved him to working at a boys' summer camp.
Yeah. So, great job, Catholic.
There's been many cases like that.
And yeah, I don't.
Sorry, hold on. I just wanted to switch gears real quick. What do you got? Do you guys have opinions? Is Joe Biden senile, or is it just like the media's doing a really good job of making it look like it?
So Joe Biden has always had a stutter.
I think
he's definitely exhibiting some minor signs of senility. I would say that he's no more senile than Trump is, but that's not saying a lot in my personal opinion.
I think he's more senile than Trump. I think Trump is dyslexic, and he just isn't very good at speaking on like certain topics for very long.
I mean, you could say the same thing for Biden. He loses his position mid-sentence. He fumbles his words and says things that don't make sense. He gets angry very suddenly. These are things that both of them do and are both strong signs of senility.
But wasn't Biden actually good at that before?
No, he's always had stutter problems.
Okay.
His entire career, he's been prone to stutters.
The thing that
Who do you think is going to be the vice president nominee?
Oh man, that makes me so upset that he painted himself into a corner by saying, I'm going to choose a woman as my VP, because then if there's a great VP option that isn't a woman, like, he's stuck now. So that was so fucking stupid, in my opinion, that he said that.
You know, on one hand, yes. On the other hand, this is a country of 330 million people.
Yeah.
If he finds a candidate for VP that is phenomenal, that's a woman, or that's a man, I'm sure he could find one that's probably as close to just as good that's a woman.
Yeah, for most people, yeah, but I'm just talking about, like, there could be somebody who has, like, extremely, like, a unique perspective or ideas or something. I don't know. It's like, it seems foolish to do that.
I think it's a pretty smart move politically.
We're also a country of 300 million people or 350 million people, and we're choosing between Joe Biden and Donald Trump.
Fair.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
I don't know if that logic tracks.
We can hope for the both picking good VPs, so when inevitably one of them dies during office, we actually get left with somebody competent. It's not going to happen, but.
Yeah, that's another thing. Do you think Trump is going to dump Pence for his second go here?
No.
I'm just asking.
It's possible that Pence's wife will be like, I'm not doing this for another 4 years, and then they'll have to make Trump will be like, I had to let him go, but I don't think so.
I'm just curious. Like, you see that sometimes for political expediency, like, oh, let me like swap them out and maybe get like a strong female Republican or something, and all of a sudden it's like.
I think Trump has a good balance with Pence, because Pence doesn't want, Trump doesn't want anybody that's going to outstage him. So, like, Pence is sort of like not a sycophant necessarily, but he's just a guy who blends into the background.
Yeah, you really don't hear much about him, except when he went to that hospital.
Without the mask? Wasn't he not wearing a mask at the hospital?
Yeah. His office did finally come out and say, yeah, we fucked up, which is unexpected and kind of big of them.
Huh. That's good.
But they did lie and said that he didn't know any better. So, despite everybody saying that he was told, wear a mask.
So, do you think that there's effectively going to be a civil war in the Democratic Party now? Just like what happened with the Republicans? I mean, I know there has been.
I don't know. Joe Biden's kind of gone more progressive. I think he's going to work pretty hard to like kind of reel that side back in.
And it depending on how Bernie does in the primaries. If he still ends up with 25% of the delegates, that means he actually gets considerable say over the DNC platform.
Huh.
Based on how the DNC works.
Any ideas of a dark horse candidate that could be slipped in?
No.
You don't think that's going to happen?
I mean, I've heard a lot of people say that. There's a decent chance that like Joe Biden drops out for personal reasons, and then like someone like Cuomo gets kind of thrown in.
Huh.
I don't think it'll happen, but I've heard that multiple times from like kind of talking head types.
Yeah, a lot of theories about that. A lot of people not exactly thrilled with Biden. Yeah, man. I don't know who I will vote for at this point. I don't like either option. Do you think 2020 is a worse election option than 2016?
No, I think if anything, it's probably a little better.
Okay. Because with Trump, you at least know what you're getting, and with Biden, he's not as bad as Hillary.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. That's pretty much all I got for tonight. I actually thought that the discussion on police was really good. Glad that we had that. and I think Connor disappeared, but when he gets back.
Yeah, no, I think we covered a nice little range of topics, and I mean,
yeah, unfortunately, there's a delay between us, which makes the talking a little bit awkward. But in general, I think we covered a good range.
I mean, Pat, even the most like professional podcast, even the most professional podcasts are going through that right now. So I don't think it's a huge thing.
Yeah.
Everyone's using like Zoom.
Yeah, pretty much. Connor, if you're still there, thank you. I'm basically ending the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And good conversation.
Yeah, let's do it again soon.
Yes.
Yeah, it's been a good way to pass the time making tortillas.
And
right on. Enjoy your dinner.
Thanks.
and
Happy Cinco de Mayo.
all right, sounds good.
American holiday.
Cinco de Mayo. Have a good
See you
night.
guys later. I'll text you. I'll text you off mic later. Bye.
All right. Talk to you later.